that. So today we're going to tell you a little bit about how digital products are made. So when someone comes in the door and tells us about their great idea for an app, how they go from that to walking out the door with this finished app. So first I'll tell you a little bit about Mudbath. We have been operating since 2013. We're a team of about 70 designers, developers and business analysts who work mainly in our Newcastle office, but we have a Sydney office and a Melbourne office and a Darwin office too. And every day we build digital products for small startups all the way to large companies like the Commonwealth Bank, NIB and Michael Hill.
So how does an idea go from being an app? Well, it happens in 7 easy-ish steps. So we start off with an idea, we go into a discovery phase, we do a lot of sketching and design, we get our business analysts involved, hand it across to developers, it goes into a round of testing, and then we launch it. And we're going to discuss all of those today.
So someone's got this great idea for the next TikTok, Tinder, or Discord, and they want to make it a reality. How do they do that? So they come to a place like Mudbath, and we take them along every step of the journey. And today, to help you understand that process, we're going to compare it to building a house. Now, I know a house is a physical building and an app is digital, but it's interesting because a lot of the people along the way do very similar jobs.
And there are a ton of different people with a ton of different skill sets who are involved from start to finish in that process. They're integral to making that final product. So like with building a house, the first step is a client giving a brief to an architect. It's then their job to turn that brief into visual mock-ups of what the building could look like. It's the exact same for a user experience designer or a UX designer. That's what Nadia and I are. We'll sketch and design different mock-ups of what the app is going to look like first.
And then it'll be up to the construction manager to take all of that advice and all the information from the client and look at the big picture. We have someone like that too. We have business analysts or product owners who are really looking at the big picture of the app, and they do the exact same thing as the construction manager.
Next up, you'll have the structural engineer who works closely with the architect and construction manager to give a more in-depth technical breakdown of how the structure is going to work, looking at the project from a physics or engineer perspective. So a solutions architect is similar to that. They're going to work closely with us UX designers and the business analysts. They'll look at all of the requirements and will detail exactly how each system will interact. They'll provide in-depth knowledge about what databases to use and what development platform is required to make the project work.
Then we have the site foreman. So when you're building a house, this is the person who says like who's on site, who's not on site, when they're there, when they're not there, when deliveries are coming. Basically, they run the show. We have people who are the same. They're called digital producers, and nothing gets done without the digital producer saying it's time. So they're tracking the budget. They're tracking when you're working on what. They're tracking every single person involved in the project. They're running all the meetings and they're making sure we're all delivering on time and on budget.
And then finally, we have our builder, the person responsible for making the thing. They'll look at all of the architectural drawings, structural engineer guidelines, the schedules outlined by the site foreman, and they're going to go off and construct a house based off of all those pieces of information. Our developers are doing the exact same thing. They are the foundation of our business. Without them, nothing gets built. They'll take everything designed and documented, and they're the ones who are going to turn it into that final product.
So as you can see, there's a lot of different people that go into the process of building both a house and an app. And if someone doesn't do their job quite right, the house will come tumbling down. Same with the app. We all need to make sure we're doing our jobs really, really well to make sure that that final product is as good as it possibly can be. So when you're building a house, the first thing you might do is do a bit of a like, oh, I really like these colors and I want these windows, and show some pictures to your architect about all your ideas. We do the same thing, but it's called discovery. And what happens is we run a workshop. So someone like me or Joe will get in the room with a business analyst, and we get all the right people from the company in the room. And this is where we discover throughout the day what all of their hopes and goals are for the app, but also what are their users' needs and wants? What kind of problems are they solving? What pain points do their current users have that the app could solve for them? And the other thing we decide in this meeting is what's going to go into the first release of the app. So we call this the MVP, or minimum viable product. And what features might we release a few weeks or months later? So they might come in a second release or a third release. The other thing we talk about in this room is accessibility. So maybe when you're building a house, you want to make sure someone with a wheelchair is able to access the front door, so you put in a ramp. When we're building digital products, we think about the same things. We know people have low vision, or they might be using a screen reader, so we make sure the fonts are large enough, the colors are accessible, that kind of thing. We use a ton of Post-it notes and Sharpies, and at the end of the day, we have a pretty good idea of what the roadmap might look like for the app.
So when you finish that discovery piece, you're going to notice something. All of those requirements and pieces of functionality that your client wants, the list is built up very quickly. And most of the time, the client will have no idea just how much it's going to cost to make all of them. This is true of both a house and an app. So imagine you're building a house and you've got a client who's walked in. It's the first time they've ever done this. And they say to you, I've got a massive family that love to visit, so I need at least 12 bedrooms. Each room is going to need an ensuite and an ocean view. I'm going to be entertaining people all the time, so I've got to have an infinity pool, otherwise what's the point? And the entire place has got to run green, so I want the whole thing to be powered off of renewable energy. Solar or hydro should do it. And I don't own one yet, but I definitely see myself as the kind of person who's going to own a helicopter in the future, so you better add in a helipad for when I get one. So we'll go off, we'll note all this down, and then we'll look at the client's budget, at which point we will respond to them and say something like, okay, so we've documented all your requirements, your wants, your needs, and with your budget of $100,000, you can't have any of them. Instead, you can have a tin shack 100 kilometers away from the nearest phone line. How does that sound? They're usually not super happy to hear that. It's the exact same in our business. It's so easy for a client to request a million features without realizing just how much work is involved. Like having the ability to make an account on an app sounds easy, but that means that you need to design the sign up and login process. You need to have a database to hold all of that private information with multi-factor authentication and encryption. You need to have a password recovery system in case someone forgets their details and can't access their account. And you need to have a team of people in place 24/7 just in case any of the systems fail. The number of hours and costs can increase dramatically just with a few additions. So it's our responsibility to give them realistic expectations at the beginning of the project about what's possible and what's the best outcome to suit their business and user needs. A news section on your app probably won't be useful if your company only writes 2 articles a year, whereas if your app is targeting the disability community, making sure it's easy for them to use should be your top priority, and that's where you should invest the money.
Okay, so we've worked out all of our requirements. We kind of have an idea of the features of the app. Now, well, sorry, let's talk about the house first. You've said you want, 3 bedrooms, backyard, 2 living areas. So the architect is going to go, great, I'll draw up a bit of a sketch for you. It's not going to be perfect, but it's an idea of what you want. We do the same thing. We have all our features and we then go into a sketching phase where we use pen and paper and we just draw up what we think each screen of the app will be. These drawings are not perfect. They're not pixel perfect at all, and that's not their goal. Their goal is just to be a blueprint that we can change easily as we get feedback. So as you'll see on your screen, these are some basic sketches of an app, and someone might go, oh, actually, we need to change this, and it's cheap and easy to change a sketch. It's much harder to change it once it's gone into design. So from there, we then move on to prototyping. Oh, no, sorry, we don't. Oh, no, we do. Sorry. From there, we move on to prototyping. So when you're building a house, your architect has gone, okay, I've got a pretty good idea of what you want, and they might build a 3D mock-up for you, and you can kind of walk through on your computer what your house might look like. We do the same thing. We call it a functional prototype. It might look like an app, but it is not an app. It's built in a program called Figma or Sketch, and it has some of the functionality of your app. You might be able to click a button. You might be able to see some of the fonts and colors. You might be able to see like this screen flies in from the right or the left, but it's not an app and it doesn't actually function. It's a prototype, and it really helps us to understand, are we on the right track and are we meeting the user's goals?
So once we've created that, it then comes time to test the thing. So 9 times out of 10, the people using the app are not the ones who are paying for it. Most of the time, you're creating something for someone else to use. So even if the client and us designers think the prototype looks, feels, and functions really well, that doesn't mean the people who are going to be using it feel the same. That's where user testing comes in. So whether you're sending the prototype for your users to test remotely, online testing, or whether you're getting them to come into the office to try it out, in-person testing, or you're pouncing on them in the wild while they're just trying to enjoy a coffee at a cafe and wipe a $5 voucher in their face, guerrilla testing, the process is more or less the same. We have a one-on-one with our participants and ask them a series of questions related to how they might use our app or where our app might fit into their lives. We'll then let them have a crack with the interactive prototype and see how they use it, what they like about it, what they don't like about it, what they find hard, and what they think is missing. You have no idea how much you learn from this process. This is how you know if you need to change your design before you send it to the developers to build. And it's much easier and cheaper to do it when it's still just drawings and design files rather than when it's built and in the market.
So when you're building a house, you've got your architectural plans and they look really nice, but they're not actually telling the builder how to build the house. These are structural engineering plans and they say how to attach the roof and how to do the foundation so the house doesn't fall down. These are vital to making sure your house stands up. We have something similar in tech called a solutions architect document. This document might look pretty dry and boring, but this is the crux of whether your app is going to work. So a senior designer or a solution architect will put this document together and they'll say, these are all the APIs that need to work. These are all the platforms that we need to integrate. Does the app need a database in the back end? It's all the technical side of the back end of the app that makes it work. And without this document and without these platforms in place, your app will just be some pretty designs that us UX designers have done, but it actually won't work. So it's super important to get a solutions architect involved.
So then it's time for the business analyst to come in and they're going to write up some user stories and acceptance criteria. So a user story is a general explanation of a software feature written from the perspective of the end user, like the one on the screen right now. Acceptance criteria, or AC, are the requirements and rules that your app must follow in order to be in line with what your user or customer needs are. They can also show how a product will interact with other apps or systems. The reason these are so important is that these are what the developers are going to use as a guide to understand how a piece of functionality should work before creating them. So the business analyst is the one that will write them up. And he'll do this, or they'll do this, by speaking to the team, looking at the prototypes and the solutions architect documentation. So there are three pieces of information in a user story. Who are the users? In this example, it's the customer. Define what actions they want to take. So when they're logged in and they tap the plus button, the photo gallery on their devices should open. And what's the outcome that they're going to get from this? So that a customer can choose to upload a photo. You then write into AC around this, which might be some conditions around what the actions and results would be. For example, like how many photos can they upload, or how big can the photo file size be? And we'll wrap all of these up and hand them across to the devs.
Okay, so you've done all your planning, everyone's written all their plans, their AC, we've done all the drawing, sketching, everything's done. We are now finally going into development. So like when you're building a house, the architect and everyone's done all their work and you've finally got crews on site, the walls are going up. This is the same with us. We are finally going into development. So the developer has been given all the information they need to now build the app. So they get their hoodie on, they put their headphones on, and they get coding. So we have a couple of developers at Mudbath. We have front-end developers who are really working on like what you see when you're using the app. So the spacing and the colors and how it looks to you. And then we have the back-end developers who are making sure the functionality in the back-end, the APIs and that kind of thing all work. And then we have someone who's called a full stack developer, which means they can code both front end and back end. And as time goes on, people are more and more becoming full stack developers.
And finally, at the very end of the process, we have the quality assurance or QA phase. This is a technical way of saying, make sure that the thing works. This is broken into two steps, visual and technical. The visual part is making sure that the end product looks like what we initially designed at the beginning of the project. Does it have the right colors, fonts? Is it all the right size? We'll create designs for how each of the how it should look across the different devices, across a mobile device, a desktop computer, or across a tablet. It will need to be tested across all of them. The technical run through is where we'll compare how the app is functioning against the user stories, whether or not it matches the acceptance criteria that we previously created. Does this button do the thing it's meant to when it's clicked against what the user story says? If all of this checks out, then we're ready to go.
Okay, so after all the thinking and planning and checking, you've been given the keys to your new house and it's time to move in. So in tech, this day is just as exciting. Your website launches or your app is added to the App Store and it's go live for all users. But it's not set and forget. As time goes on, there might be some bugs that arise with the app, or as you're following the product roadmap, it might be time for the second release or the third release. So we're adding more features as time goes on. And Mudbath sticks with the client every step of the way, and we handle all of this. And there you have it. That's how you go from your $1 million idea to a fully functional app.
Well, thank you for your amazing presentation. We have a few questions here for you. How would you get work experience at Mudbath?
That's a very good question, actually. So we are always looking for work experience participants. Usually it's a case of just submitting an email to us. On that previous screen, we had our email address up. If you contact us and say, I'm looking for a work experience, we'll then let you know whether or not we have an available slot that you can come in and do some.
What do you think is the most important and demanded role in the software development cycle?
Whoa.
I would probably say at the moment it's developers. So if you're thinking about a career in tech and you're not sure what you want to go into, but you want to be in demand, become a developer. They are so sought after at the moment.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And like from the perspective of what type of developer to become, or like each developer in our office would argue their part is the most important. I think like especially when you're starting out, getting a good spread of different languages and different sort of like coding practices is probably the way to go, just so you can understand what exactly you like to do, but also having knowledge about all the different areas will really help as well for your prospective positions later on.
Yeah. What coding languages do you need to know?
You want me to take this, Joe?
Go for it.
So there's a lot, but at Mudbath, we use Vue.js, React.js, Angular, .NET, and Node.js. But that doesn't mean there's not more languages to learn. There is, but they're the ones we mainly use here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I will add to that as well. Like you do need to have an understanding of like basic HTML and CSS as well to go along with those. But yeah, those are the JavaScript languages that we've been using.
Are there any tips for high school students wanting to start their career?
I would definitely say that the biggest piece of advice I can say is just start creating something. Whether you're a developer or a designer, just go out and just try making something. Because ultimately, like, when you're trying to enter into the workforce, that's what we're looking for. As in, like, it doesn't necessarily matter if you have you don't necessarily have to have a degree in the subject. You just need to be able to show that you can do the work. So even if you've got examples of just like making branding or coding up something, that's really what's going to help you. So just get out there and just try and learn as much as possible, practice as much as possible.
And the program we use to design Figma is free. So you can have a brand maybe that you really like and you think, oh, I could design this web page or this part of their app a little bit better. And you could just go into Figma and do it and just include that in your portfolio. It doesn't matter whether someone's actually hired you to do the work. It's just showing us that you can.
Yeah. What uni degree do you recommend studying?
So it's gonna differ depending on what profession you want to get into. For example, I did multimedia technology and design back in the UK, and that was a perfect entry point into digital design because it taught me a lot of different practices in terms of like coding and designing and like video editing and that kind of stuff. But as soon as you want to get into more of a development point of view, then something like computer science, I think, would be the way to go.
What is the biggest project you have done at Mudbath? I'll let Joe answer this.
For the biggest project I've done, that's a very good question. I would say it's probably like we've done a lot of internal tools for some coal shipping companies. So there was one for I'm not sure if I can say the name. Let's just say it was a multi-million-dollar project where it took months and months of investigation in order to understand exactly what it was looking like and like exactly what the project was going to look like. So it was a really, really huge engagement that was really fun to like dig into.
Yep. What did you two study at university? I'll let Joe go first, then Nadia.
Mine was multimedia design and technology at the University of Kent in the UK.
Yep.
So I studied a Bachelor of Communications at Western Sydney University, and I worked in communications for a number of years. And then in the past kind of 2 years, I switched over to UX design because there's a lot of transferable skills. So I would, if you do want to be a UX designer, maybe study something like visual communications or graphic design. I think some unis are starting to offer more UX design courses now, I think.
Mm.
Yep. What made you decide that you wanted to work in the IT industry? I'll let Nadia answer this.
We get stuff done. That's why. So I've worked for a lot of companies before where things happen, but they happen quite slow. Whereas in IT, we do something called Agile, which is a type of working, which means basically things happen really quickly and there's no kind of sitting around wondering what to do next. There's a list of things to do that's run by our digital producers, and we work really hard and really fast, but we see results really fast as well. So that's why I really like it. And you get to be really creative and you get to see an app that you actually designed. It's pretty cool.
I would say for me, when I initially started out in like graphic design, you know, I kind of assumed that I'd be making like magazines and doing branding, like logos and stuff. And then as soon as I actually got into the field, I started to work more in the digital side, and instantly I just found it so much more interesting. Because I mean, so this isn't to say anyone that wants to become a print designer, but there's something so fascinating about like being able to create user flows and interactive products that can like animate and do all kinds of like crazy stuff on like a web page, whereas something physical is a bit more flat and it's sort of like a bit more final. So I just found it to be like, just like as in there was a much deeper well of directions that you could go in a digital area rather than a physical one.
And I will just add one last thing. We do a lot of problem solving, which is really great. Like we get to talk to the actual end users and say, what is difficult for you and how can we solve that for you? And then we get to do it. We actually get to solve things for people, which is great.
Yep. What is the favorite part of your job? I'll let Nadia
go, Joe.
Oh,
The favorite part of my job is what I said, solving things for people. But I also really like working for Mudbath in particular because we're a really great team with a really awesome culture. We do lunches, we do mud drinks. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that, but it's a really fun place to work.
I would say my favorite part is probably, so imagine once you've gone through all of the phases we just talked about with the discovery, you know, you've sat down in like in a room for like 3 to 6 hours sometimes speaking to your client, trying to work through these issues. My favorite part is when we go away, we do these sketches and we make prototypes. And it's when you bring it back to a client, you sit down in a room to review it, and you realize that you were completely aligned on what this product should be. It's a really satisfying feeling because it means that the client feels like they're heard, and also you feel like you've done a good job of interpreting their wants and their needs and your users' needs. That's just a really satisfying feeling.
Yep. What made you decide that you wanted to work in the IT industry?
I mean, it's kind of similar to the previous one, I suppose. I initially wanted to get into graphic design. I was getting into graphic design, and then sort of like just joined into a company who was a bit more like digital focused. So I suppose that's why I started working for websites instead.
Yeah. What do you do on a daily basis at Mudbath? I'll let Nadia answer this.
It depends where the product is up to in its life cycle, but so I can be doing a workshop with a client, I can be doing sketches. I spend a lot of time working in Sketch and Figma, making prototypes. At the moment, I'm writing handover notes for a designer for something that's about to be designed. So there's probably about 5 or 6 kind of different activities that I'd be doing at any time, depending on the project.
I mean, like, yeah, even if I look to yesterday, I mean, so yesterday we had to present a prototype back to one of our clients for a review. We had a catch up about like what direction we were going to go forward next with it. I saw some design work that was happening across a few other projects and just made sure that that was also going in the right direction. Had to review something which had been built by the developers and make sure that it was like looking like what we initially designed. and also did some prep for a presentation, which I'm currently studying right now. So it can really, yeah, it can be really diverse, and there's always, it's never just one thing you're working on. There's always like a few spinning plates during a day.
Yep. How do you start entry-level works if you don't have previous experience in this field? I'll let Nadia answer this.
So if you have no experience whatsoever, but you know you want to work in tech, I would probably try and get like a junior role. If you want, I can only speak to UX design because that's what I know. So if you can get like a junior role as just a designer for anyone. So we have 8 UX designers here, and I don't think any of us actually studied UX design at university. We've all kind of come from different sectors where we had transferable skills. So get a junior role in a company that maybe has an ICT team, and you can see what they're doing and be involved, so that when you come and knock on Mudbath's door, you can say, look, I haven't been a UX designer before, but I was involved in this project. I did some user testing or something like that. So you don't necessarily need to go and be a UX designer as your first job. Just try and be a part of an organization that has that type of function and get some experience that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's similar to what I was saying earlier as well. Like, if you are serious about getting into any of these vocations, you just need to go out and just try and do some of the work. Like, you don't need to have an actual client in order to do a project, as in you can just make one up. You can make up like just a brand that you want to do some branding for, or you can just decide, I want to code up this thing or make a website, anything like that. But yeah, to Nadia's point, the way that I got into my first role was I was actually doing work experience for the British Council in the UK. And then when I went to an interview, it just reflected so much better that I was already trying to put myself out into the world by the fact that I was working for free for this other company. So then it really looks good to get work experience across the board, especially if you haven't had a job previously.
Yeah. I think we only have time for one final question. What mistakes did you make early in your career? I'll let Nadia go first.
Not having someone else proofread your work before it goes live, which, because I used to work in like physical communications, like annual reports and stuff like that, and things would get printed and then there was nothing you can do about it. That was really bad. But now that we work in digital, at least you can make a change when the website goes live and it's got a big spelling error on the homepage. But yeah, so just having reviews with other designers constantly, and having someone who's never seen the project at all maybe see it before it goes live is really, really helpful.
And I would say as well, like, and this is more on like the career progression point of view, there was a point when I first started my job, I had this like fixed idea that, like, you know, I was making logos and doing branding, and I was kind of like fighting the urge to like get into digital at the beginning, and then but I really don't know why, because I was really enjoying what I was doing. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you start working for someone with, whether it's work experience or actually at a job, just sort of go with the flow a bit and just see sort of where the world takes you, because you might not necessarily have plans to get into a particular area, but at the same time you can slot in there and it can actually like end up becoming exactly what you wanted.